Hello, true duelists. It's YGO Strat's Yu-Gi-Oh! Single Card History, where I'm going to be talking about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and some of the other ones that have names like Pot of Generosity. Today's card, the worst type of floodgate that's just been playable for years, Artifact Scythe. Scythe was first released in Primal Origin in 2014 as an ultra rare at sneak peeks for the set, with notable reprints to date including the 2015 Megatins as a super rare in, you won't believe it, but the year of 2015, another ultra rare printing in Battles of Legend Heroes Revenge in 2019, and as a peasant rare in the Albaz structure deck in 2022. As I make this video, it has spent no time on the ban list, although that is not due to a lack of complaints, I can assure you. A level 5 light attribute fairy type monster with 2200 attack and 900 defense, its effect reads: you can set this card from your hand to your spell and trap zone as a spell. During your opponent's turn, if this set card in the spell and trap zone is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, special summon it. If this card is special summoned during your opponent's turn, your opponent cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn. My god, does this thing suck to play against. Can we just be real? This card is one of the least fun things to deal with, and I know, I'm about to get into the decks that played this card and all the ways that it's been used, but man, as I make this card, why isn't it banned yet? Please, God, Konami, just let the suffering end. I'm begging you. And with that out of the way, let's talk about all the ways this card has been used. There's so many and they're so unique. Can you tell what sarcasm is? God, I hope so. This card, somewhat shockingly, saw very limited play early on after its release. Its release in Primal Origin was alongside the rest of the Artifact core, and was actually as a TCG exclusive on release. Yes, Konami's TCG department decided to inflict us with this card, and in the tried and true method of releasing only cards that are either fantastic to broken or absolutely useless, Scythe falls into one of those categories. The former, especially as time has gone on. Debuting with the Artifacts meant out of the gate it was a contender in a format that the Artifact archetype helped to define, hat format. The Artifact engine at this point in time was most popular for Morale Tech, a non-targeting pop that enraged a younger me while playing Maiden with the Eyes of Blue. Morale Tech alongside Artifact Sanctum in order to summon it from the deck, and even Artifact Ignition, an in-archetype NST that would also set an artifact to your field. The artifacts as an archetype have a pretty unique gimmick, setting themselves as spells from your hand onto your spell and trap zone, and all of them have that same effect that if destroyed on the opponent's turn will summon themselves. This helped to deter players from blindly destroying back row in the format, which worked great when played with a deck that had other solid trap cards already in it, like Bottomless Trap Hole or Torrential Tribute. All this, coupled with the Fire and Ice Hand's ability to clear boards, all came together to make for a very solid and reliant style of control deck in Hat, and is seen as one of the, if not the best decks of the format, and one that is fondly remembered by most of the people who played it. Still, Scythe wasn't the most popular choice to play at this time. That's not to say no one played it at all, it's just it wasn't widely as played as you might assume in a post-2020 Yu-Gi-Oh! World. This list here is Andre Torres' first place list from the Colombian National Championships in 2014, and even here you see that it's being played as a one-of. It didn't always feel as high impact as a well-timed Morale Tech might. That's my guess. Granted, I'm no expert of the format, so if you are, feel free to correct me by all means. But I was playing in this format quite frequently, and it is one of my favorites, so I have some absolute amateur takes on why Scythe wasn't quite as popular in 2014. If I had to guess, it's twofold. For one, Hat was the most popular deck at the time as I remember it, and Scythe in the mirror match was only a small step above useless. Hat did use its extra deck, but it wasn't the win condition. It was more as an extra bit of toolboxing to help out boards and problems that the hands, artifacts, and plethora of trap cards couldn't. The hands were best utilized staying on the field, not as Xyz material, and a Morale Tech popping a monster could have just as much impact as Scythe stopping the extra deck. One could even argue popping the monster makes it easier to get chip damage in and help steal the game that way. So while Scythe could be used in the mirror to stop something like Traptrix Dionia, unless it was going up against Soul Charge, Morale Tech felt like the right choice 9 times out of 10. Even outside of the mirror match, however, Hat is a format filled with as many decks that need the extra deck as it has decks that can play without it. Yeah, Scythe locking a deck like Geargia, Infernity, or Madolche will severely hinder their ability to make impactful plays, but Scythe locking Spellbook is next to useless, and even popular decks like Fire Fist and Mermail have ways to clear boards and push for games without having to go into the extra deck. Even funnier is Scythe locking Lightsworn Rulers, monsters, because you did it. They can't make Dracosack, and now they're beating your ass down with an army of every dragon you've ever seen. I think the format was diverse enough, not just in decks, but even in how the decks could play to make wins, that locking a player out of the extra deck wasn't as assured of a win as it would become in the future. So Scythe as a card saw more limited play. Again, amateur hour here. I'd love to hear your take on it as well. Hat is a format that's best known for two things though: a diverse meta and a quick death once Duelist Alliance dropped. Yep, it's that time of the video where I mentioned Duelist Alliance exists and that cards before it don't after it. That sentence makes sense? I don't know. What does make sense is Artifact Dolls being a popular build for Shaddoll decks, with the artifact serving as a great bit of disruption and doubling as the light material to make Construct. Timothy Bailey's top 8 Artifact Dolls list did play Scythe as well, but even with Morale Tech at 1, Scythe was still only a 1 of. Again, this is somewhat format dependent. By this point, we were in the middle of Nekroz format, and again, Scythe locking Nekroz didn't exactly stop you from getting trished for your foams. And that's with me skipping over an entire year essentially of mid-Duelist Alliance format, where again Scythe saw limited play. Artifact Dolls did see sporadic tops throughout the year, but Scythe still wasn't the go-to choice to interrupt plays. This might be because Scythe didn't stop the Burning Abyss monsters from floating and then killing you the turn afterwards, or maybe because it didn't stop a already on-field stealth or cleave fort once they were on the board. It might help prevent them from getting onto the board as a tribute summon when Pendulum summoned, but evidently players felt it wasn't quite as ideal. Cosmo is probably the next deck to play it with the most success and frequency. Luke Luxford's Portsmouth Regional in 2016 shows a mostly typical build for its time and was piloted to get top 8. With Scythe being a level 5, it doubled as Pleiades material once the effect had gone off, and was a solid means to prevent PK Fire and extra deck Monarchs from being able to make most of their plays. Didn't save Cosmo from getting Erebus, but shutting off Brilliant Fusion plays could be devastating against a bricky-prone deck like Monarchs. This is also a deck well suited to play artifacts, since in general Cosmo frequently main decked Call of the Haunted to revive ships from the graveyard, and the artifact monster's effects will proc off any special summon, not just their own special summoning effect when destroyed in the spell and trap zone, which meant that all of your Call of the Haunteds, or even Oasis of Dragon Souls depending on the build, could double as an extra bit of stun factor for the deck. I can mention some sporadic decks that played Scythe, such as Tellarknight sporadically playing it throughout 2014 and even up to some regionals in late 2016. This build was that of Louis Dorta, which got top 8 at a Palm Beach regional in 2016, and uses it much the same way Cosmo did. Get it out with Sanctum, and then you can loop it again with all your calls and Oasises as tradition deems it apparently. There was also a small rise of some ABC builds playing it in 2017. This list here from a Tennessee regional got to top 8, being the standard ABC build more or less, just with the added spice of maining Scythe because stopping Zodiac from using the extra deck was imperative to standing a chance in 9 duels out of the 10 you'd play. The next true home for Scythe, however, would be in the Wind Witch Artifact Invoked deck, a deck I've always felt was the sequel to Hat of sorts, being a pile of engines and using artifacts as one of them. The standard ratio in most builds was a singular Morale Tech and 2 Scythe, with Morale Tech still being limited at the time. This list from Ian Tezer got first place at the official Tournament Store Championship in 2017, and was even playing Call of the Haunted, in no small part just to revive those artifacts for an extra bit of hate. The deck would use the artifacts on turn 2 to couple with the standard Wind Witch turn 1 destruction-proof Crystal Wing, and usually an invoked Ragin for more disruption, and ultimately fell out of favor with players not due to any hits from the ban list, but instead from hits from game mechanics. Master Rule 4 would make its usual Crystal Wing and Raijin play impossible to pull off, and as such, it fell out of favor with most players. After this, it briefly falls out of popularity again until Spiral format, where it again shows up, but almost never in the main deck. Scythe was a very popular side deck card in Spiral builds, especially in going second builds that were popular at the time. Thomas Rogue got first place at 2018 San Jose Regional with this list, main decking evenly matched as proof of all-out commitment to the blind second to help break boards before building its own, and it was a popular strategy at its time, so it wasn't uncommon to be forced to go first in game 2 if you would win, and as such it was popular to side in an artifact package to lock the opponent out of the game before pushing for his own win in turn 3. From this point on, Scythe becomes popular as a side deck card, slowly starting its transition from side deck tech into problem of the format. All sorts of decks start to play Scythe. Mech Knight is a common deck playing it because they have access to World Legacy Secrets, a searchable Call of the Haunted of sorts that could revive Scythe. Sky Striker builds sided in toss format because toss format is 4 decks that live and die on their extra decks, which means Hand Trap Disruption Deck Salamangreat was also signing it as well. This is its role for the majority of the format, and it was mostly the same during Disease format, as I call it, because Adamancipator and Eldritch might have sided it, but by the time we reach the Adventure format, things start to change. Scythe joins Mystic Mine and Imperial Order as 3 cards the community starts to hate for ruining games and absolutely continuing to see play because these are cards that can win games by themselves. Just 8 years after Scythe's debut, not only has the game sped up a noticeable amount, but the extra deck is at its strongest and most important ever. Not only that, but OTKs are far easier and more generic thanks to the likes of cards like Access Code or Boral Sword Dragon. So where once being Scythe Lock cost you a turn, suddenly a Scythe Lock could cost you a duel, since winning is just 1 link 4 away. And with the release of Artifact Dagda in 2020, suddenly players had access to set Scythe turn 1 without having to hard draw into a Sanctum, as had been necessary before. And so with the realization that you only needed to find a way to pop the set Scythe to win game, suddenly the game was awash with decks playing cards to proc the Scythe Lock. From less tiered decks like Fluffle, using the new Whale to pop it on the opponent's turn, and when Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer dropped, making Dagna to set Scythe before going into Verte to get out Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer meant that all decks that had effect monsters had access to the Scythe Lock, on top of a DPE and any other card they made in the process. Adventure Piles, Phantom Knight, Therian, Punk, you name it. If it could make Scythe Locks, it was pretty well trying its damnedest. I'm going to take time to mention one combo in particular because it disgusted me when I heard about it. Setting Scythe off of Dagda, and then having Crystron Halka Fibrax on your field. You keep Halka on board, then pass to the opponent's turn, and use its effect to tag into TG Wonder Magician. Wonder Magician will then pop Scythe, and after Scythe activates its effect to lock the opponent, you chain Wonder Magician to Synchro Summon on the opponent's turn, summoning Baron de Fleur on their turn, and Scythe locking them all in one go. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is fun, and if you disagree with me, I will block you. Do not at me. Still, with the bannings of Verte and even Hulk to a lesser degree, it has become much less common, praise Xenu, although it isn't gone entirely. While DPE isn't as generic anymore, Dagda is as accessible as ever, and even some odd sprite builds have gone on to play it, and one mad lad playing Ishizu Tearlaments stopped playing Scythe as well. Granted, this is again through the use of Sanctum and as a side deck card to summon it out, but it's still around. It still exists. And that brings us to today as I'm making this video. Like I mentioned earlier, the game has definitely evolved over the years, namely in terms of how important the extra deck is and how crucial it is to have access to it to even stand a chance at winning a duel. Access to it through either Sanctum or by setting and then popping it off Dagda has made it incredibly reliable for a wide number of decks. And sure, there are plenty of means to stop this card. An Infinite Impermanence if you don't control any cards, ashing the Artifact Sanctum if they use that, called buying it in the graveyard. Plenty of means to disrupt it. But at the end of the day, when it goes off, it can win a game by itself, which is a bit much for one card to be doing in the game. Granted, that is just my opinion. Overall, Scythe has been, let's call it an interesting card in this game. It started out as a tech card, more than anything else, something to stop a turn, only used sporadically in the competitive scene, whether or not that was the right call at the time. The ease of access to it through Sanctum, and eventually Dagda, has made it more and more easy to abuse since its release, and as 2022 showed us, it can be used quite effectively to help win games. As I make this video, the card remains unlimited, and while in the current format it is not a problem, I believe it's only a matter of time until it becomes a problem again, and honestly winds up on the ban list in some capacity. No shot Moraltech is the only artifact that's been a problem card in this game's history, and so that's our look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, Artifact Scythe. Stay tuned for our next video, and feel free to suggest some cards to review or what type of video you would like to see. Don't forget to like, and as always, subscribe to YGO Strats to impress your smoking Italian wife, and so you too can become a true duelist.